everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today.
Oh.
Because we're two friends talking fantasy like it's 2020, because we are going way
let's
back.
Hope it's not 2020.
No, we don't want
year.
to. It was bad, but it was good for our reading schedule, because that was the year that we read the book that we are revisiting today. I am, of course, referring to The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, Book 1 of the Kingkiller Chronicles. We're back.
We're back. I mean, this is a return to form for us, Charles. I mean, you did say it takes us back to 2020, and pandemics aside, that was a great year for our reading. And it was a triumph when I finally convinced you to read The Name of the Wind for the podcast in one of our first ever Friends Pitching Fantasies.
It was like
maybe
the second series we ever read, yeah.
Yeah, so it is coming full circle here, because now we are doing a reread after I've read it. I really couldn't remember if this would be my fourth time or my third time reading it. I think it might be my fourth time reading this book. And Charles, it'll be your second time reading this book. And this is kind of the start of a new format for our show, a new kind of episode for our show, which is these reread episodes. So we're going to try to take some of our favorite books that we've ever read, and books that we know we have really passionate fan bases on. Like, we know the listenership loves our episodes on the Kingkiller Chronicle, for example. We love the Kingkiller Chronicle. So what we're going to do is just take it piece by piece. You'll see in the title for this episode that we're doing the prologue through chapter 5. And we're just going to give you a ton of content, probably over a long period of time, spaced out, but a ton of content on this awesome book. And eventually we hope to get to doing this with other beloved books, like The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie would be another one. So it is an exciting time for us, Charles. Something that we ought to say here at the top too is that these reread episodes that we're going to do, we're going to go no holes barred in terms of spoilers. So that means everything in the Kingkiller Chronicle universe is now fair game for Charles and I to talk about in this episode. So not the usual style where if we're talking about Name of the Wind, then you don't have to worry about Wise Man's Fear or whatever. No, not in this one. In this one, if you don't want anything from the Kingkiller Chronicle spoiled for you, then now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones, because it's a super fun new thing for us, Charles, here, where we can discuss the book like in pieces like this, but also be completely open when it comes to uninhibited. Well said, Charles. When it comes to talking about the stuff that's going to come later. We just haven't really been able to do this before, and this is our the book that we thought would be the best one to start this format with.
Agreed. This, for the revisit, we didn't want to just have the same conversation we had 3 years ago. So if you're looking for those kind of rolled out spoilers book by book, then you can definitely go back and check those out. We figured if we were going to revisit the Kingkiller Chronicle, which is to this day, 3 years later, one of our most checked out episodes,
It is our most,
it is of all time, but even in like a month-to-month basis, it still charts pretty high, just like in the downloads looking at the last month. So we know that there's a lot of interest around the conversation for Kingkiller. So this is really our chance to deep dive into the series, take it in bites at a time, and continue to roll out our reading schedule of the other books that we have going on. We've got Robin Hobb going on right now and the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and we just finished Brandon Sanderson. So this allows us to keep going with Kingkiller without this...
Not a book by him. We just finished the man.
Yeah,
so.
we've been there, we've done that. Nothing more to say. No, obviously,
except when we go back and read
Yumi
a giant book by him later this year. when the
that book's gonna be
book,
crazy.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can I just gotta see it in the bookstore. It's gonna be like 4 or 5 inches wide. It's gonna be crazy.
Yeah.
But until that time, we have Kingkiller to discuss. So as Dylan said, full spoilers. I'm super excited to get into it. The first thing I gotta say, it has been like 3 years since I've picked this book up. Like, we did read some of the short stories we read, but never discussed Narrow Road Between Desires. And still, though, to go back to the beginning of The Name of the Wind, we've read so much great fantasy since then. And that was one of our first series that we read on the show. We're reading greats, like we've read new works from Abercrombie since then. We've read Robin Hobb since then. And to go back and see, like, does that hold up as strong as it did in my memories? The answer is yes. Like, it's right away one of the best prologues, intros to a fantasy story, hard stop.
Yeah, it felt like coming home, Charles. I'm going to be real with you. I'm so nostalgic about this series that I do feel like it's my vision clouded here. But I don't know. I just don't see how I could be wrong here, because the prologue is just gorgeous, dude. It is just like, it's like poetry. And I mean, that's just Patrick Rothfuss's writing style in general, but the prologue is a masterpiece. This whole it's like iconic at this point, right? The silence of 3 parts,
right?
And it just delivers such beautiful lines. Like, my favorite has always been right at the tail end, right? This it was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient cut-flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Just something about that imagery of the cut flower is like, I don't know how Rothfuss thinks of this stuff. And just like, even right before the line right before that is like, it was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It's like,
yeah,
dude, like, he just has this way
poetry
of speaking and writing about things that is just, it's like I don't even know how to explain it. It's like a vibe in some ways. Like, I think if you asked him to like explain it, it would almost lose some of the magic. But it's like, you just kind of get it. Like you say, as deep and wide as autumn's ending, or you say the cut flower sound of a man who's waiting to die. Like, the idea of a cut flower is just like the killing of something beautiful,
right, but it's like alive,
fragile,
apparent, even though it's been cut. Like, there's that poetry in that. Absolutely. And that's the thing that really amazes me about the beginning of this book, because my first read through, you don't fully piece together what Patrick Rothfuss is all about in writing this book. And, we can all speculate still on what that is. The series is not finished. But one of the things that I've learned from Patrick Rothfuss, both reading everything he's published and then also listening to him talk, and, I read the epilogue in The Narrow Road Between Desires, which was probably the most recent thing he's written. He probably wrote that a year or two ago for the reprint of the book. And he goes on about, what makes a good story. And it's not necessarily the rising action, the big reveals, the huge character moments, the happy endings. He's really trying to find the poetry in the art of telling the story. And so he's crafting this setting of, it is an inn with like 5 boring people in it telling a boring story. He's like, but he finds the beauty in each character. Kvothe is this tragic character, right? The cut flower waiting to die. And then you have other characters who it's just like a ranting bachelor, and then all the younger people that listen to him but know not to take any of his advice. He finds the way to capture these moments in time and put real beauty into them, without making them these huge integral story moments. And I think that's really the pursuit Rothfuss has taken with this story, and you can see how he's painstakingly thought of these moments. It's like, how many ways can you describe just a quiet guy cleaning a cup without exposition dumping that he's this legendary character and hiding? There's only so many ways you can do that, and Rothfuss's restraint, but also his prose, the way he combines them, it's next level.
Yeah, that's well said, Charles. Yeah, the beauty, because almost nothing happens in these first 5 chapters, right? I mean, it's essentially a guy who's in an inn. You get the sense that he has seen better days. He's some epic figure that people kind of a couple times he kind of gets recognized, or at least once he kind of gets recognized. But otherwise, he's kind of just living his mostly humble life as an innkeeper, but has this deep-seated, I guess it's a depression going on that is kind of weighing on him in a way where he's better off just acting out this role of an innkeeper. Other than that, you just got Bast. That's his student in some ways. He's mischievous. You have stuff going on in the tavern, and you have a chronicler coming. And the only thing you really get as any sort of action is this spider demon-ish thing. The Squirrel shows up. First as a dead squirrel, then as this, they're all attacking chronicler and all that stuff. But it's really not a lot happens, if we're being honest. But it's so beautiful the way that these small moments are written. Even I just think Rothfuss has this beautiful way of conveying aspects of his characters in the prose that kind of clue you in slowly over time to all of these factors. Even just small throwaway lines, when he's I don't have the quote on this, but there's along lines of when there's actually people in his inn and they're getting stuff, and it's and he sweeps up the money like he actually needed it, or he's walking around picking up the coin like he actually needed the money, and it's
right.
things
and there's
like
a
that
line where it's he doesn't need money,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're learning the character not by Rothfuss telling you he picked up the coins, but of course he didn't need the money because he had acquired so many during his journeys.
Right.
Many authors write that. Many authors who we love their books write stuff like that, and we just keep going. But Rothfuss is how can I tell you about character? I'll just tell you with this quick line that tells you so much. And that's a throwaway. That's not even by any means the best example, but
no.
It tells you kind of how this beautiful characterization takes place so smoothly you hardly even notice it happening.
Right. And there's even moments so much of that, like you said, Dylan, is the implication that there's something more going on with Kvothe, where it's even he called himself Kvothe is the sentence where you're okay, that's interesting that he would do that. Phrase it that way. And Patrick Rothfuss is the absolute master of saying more with less through phrasing like that. He called himself Kvothe. Has a vast amount of implications, and yet somehow it still navigates you down the path of being suspicious in the right ways. I don't know how he does it. It's masterful. And the next sentence there is, he had chosen the name carefully when he came to this place. So it's okay, you're getting all of these crazy clues, which aren't really to any great mystery. It's just more to the background of this mysterious character Kvothe, and it doesn't like, it doesn't exposition dump. It doesn't dwell on anything not interesting. It just keeps you in the mood, in the atmosphere of this character who, like you said, Dylan, has this like some sort of depression going on to the point where coping is almost like pretending to be a nondescript tavern keeper. There's even a line in here which he even hummed a little, although he did not realize it, and would have stopped himself if he had known. Which is like crazy. Like, what? Like, you can relate to that instantly, but it's the way that he's layering the information and picking random details that normally would have nothing to do with explaining a character. It's just like, oh, he grabbed a coin like he needed it. You know, it's such a unique way of giving us information that I can't think of any other author in the biz who's doing that. You know, I don't even know how you could replicate it.
No, it's so unique, and some have tried, but none have truly replicated Rothfuss. And I think that it's that line you were talking about with he called himself Kvothe. Some of what's interesting is what comes after is he had taken a new name for most of the usual reasons and for a few unusual ones as well, not the least of which was the fact that names were important to him. So it's like all of these seeds that some of which have not paid off many, many years later because we're waiting for book 3 so patiently. But some of which have already. Now that we've read through Name of the Wind, Wise Man's Fear, it's very clear why names are important to him and what might be some of those unusual reasons. You know, obviously naming is a form of the soft magic system in this series. So when you first read this, you're like, okay, the book's called The Name of the Wind, and the author's hinting at that there's unusual reasons why names might be important and why someone might have chosen Kvothe versus another name. But we don't get all of that. We just get this seed planted. And Rothfuss just lays those throughout all over the place. And I mean, another one you mentioned the humming of the tune. Even in the prologue, it's as we're going through the silences, and it's like, oh, if there'd been this, if there'd been that, it says, if there had been music, but no, of course there was no music. It's like, wait, why is music something that is so important to single out as no, of course that's not there? Because it gets more attention than just like, oh, if there'd been a crowd, then it'd be like this. It's like, of course there was no music. And again,
it's not something Kvothe would allow.
Yes.
Because the emotional attachment to music, which we know later how important music is in the story. But yeah, it's a great detail to point out. And it's just like one of those things that you're between saying names are important. Of course, there's no music. Like the efficiency of which he knows every star, like he knows his own hands. It's all that stuff that we know now his kind of origin story. But when you're first reading it, you're only being clued in. So it's definitely a fun revisit for sure. So there was so many of these details. It's like hard to figure out. Like we could just read the 5 chapters and marvel at the context. And it's to me like there's something about this character Kvothe that pulls you in right away. And to me, fantasy can be such a struggle with something that we hear all the time with authors, show and tell. And I think it has a different meaning in fantasy because, you have to describe a whole new world. You have to describe new characters. And the way Rothfuss approaches this show and tell aspect of explaining this character and fighting these monsters and the fact that there's like a war brewing and times are getting harder. Like he knows not only what to not, to to show, but he's showing it in a way that's super indirect. It's really interesting how he does that, where it's not even like, oh, I'm just going to show you this like robbery scene. It's, oh, I'm going to show you this character who's like having this fun interaction with his robber. Or I'm going to show you Kvothe, cleaning the bar with a mop bucket that's still clean after he's done like cleaning the whole bar with it. It's like, well, why are those things happening? He's telling you through this indirect, roundabout, poetic way, because as we know, it's the storytelling as an art that is really what's inspired Kingkiller Chronicle. And it's almost like the fact that it isn't finished yet is kind of poetic as well, because it's like to be able to enjoy it without a known ending, without a resolution, is the whole point. That's the experience, that's the beauty, and he implies that right from the beginning of this book too.
Yeah, it's always been about the journey, not about the destination when it comes to the Kingkiller Chronicle, and that is why there is some poetry, as you say, to it being unfinished. And there's plenty of quotes, I'm sure, that we'll pull throughout this reread that kind of get at that idea. Like, there's plenty of times where Kvothe, as someone who we learn later because of the Kvothe, I believe that's the right way of pronouncing that, but the creature in the tree that has basically doomed Kvothe to like wherever this ends up is gonna be horrible, because I see the future and I was able to like give the little like slight adjustment of the timeline through my interaction with you to get this to the most awful end possible. Like that's what the Kvothe does to Kvothe, right? So he knows it's gonna end up terrible whatever happens. So he's, for Kvothe, the way he sees it, and I think there's a whole quote about like, oh, like, does that make can you not enjoy like a sweet fruit anymore knowing that like things are going to end poorly? It's like there's all these kind of quotes that come up throughout. But when it comes to this one, I think really the first 5 chapters are defined by these: how can I plant seeds in people's heads? How can I draw intrigue and leave mystery that will keep people interested as they move forward with this, both in the character that they're learning about through these subtle means, in the world that they're learning about through even just the small moments, like you said, like people, like we've got Cobb, is that his name?
Yep.
The
Old Cobb.
Old Cobb. He's complaining about like, oh yeah, that last merchant that came in was trying to rip me off with like trying to sell me salt at this price. Like I wouldn't pay any more than this, and even that's a robbery. Like he's saying that, and then you've just got the other the other people sitting around just being like, really could use that salt now.
Yeah.
I
Man, I really wish we had bought that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like those kind of moments that are just like entertaining in themselves, but what Rothfuss is doing is he's subtly telling you like times are really hard. Something's going on the road that is stopping merchants from coming. They haven't been here in a long time, and they're hiking up the prices. And even at those prices, people wish they got it, because that's how difficult it is to acquire supplies when the roads are like that. It's like all those things you're taking in instead of like, exposition through Cobb being like, well, the roads are really tough right now, and like I've heard rumors of the Skrill, and you know what Skrill are, right? It's like we don't need that. We just need like, okay, times are tough, and we're learning it through these like just entertaining little interactions rather than through exposition.
Right, and even like the scene where Bast enters the scene, and Bast and Kvothe are talking about the Skrill attack. And it's basically Bast is like, what did you do with the body of the Skrell that guy dragged in, that he killed by accident, dumb luck basically. And Kvothe is like, I didn't do anything, I'm the humble innkeeper. And then, Bast is shocked, but then Kvothe goes, yes, I made sure, we dug the hole, I made sure the right wood was used, yes, I made sure it burned long and hot, no one took any souvenirs. Like, it's pure dialogue, but what it does is it shows you it tells you a lot. It tells you that Kvothe knows more about the supernatural stuff than most people in this town even believe to be real, and that he knows all of these rules and things. He's kind of like looking out for people in this way, and he's holding something back, which we knew he was doing that throughout the prose, but this is one of the first times you see, like, yeah, I'm maneuvering in the background, I'm helping out where I can, and it was all through lines of dialogue. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was. And something else that's interesting about the Skrell stuff, now that we can speak to the whole series, is Kvothe or Kote was able to head out and seek out the Skrell, and that's when Chronicler and him meet and all that. And he apparently killed like 5 of them. And Chronicler, of course, got knocked out, so he didn't really get to see it. I think he like heard a faint explosion or something. And then Kote comes back, and Bast is like, hey, like, you should be dead. How are you able to do that? In addition to being pissed that Kvothe left him a note. What's interesting about that is it implies that Kote still has a significant amount of power that he can draw from. And it contrasts with what happens. I can't remember if it's late in Name of the Wind or if it's in Wise Man's Fear. But you remember, like, some sort of, like, robbers or something come by Kote's inn in the Frame story, and they, like, beat the crap out of him.
Yes.
And it kind of implies, like, and then there's this moment where he's like, oh, like, you don't know who you're messing with. And then they're like, oh, who are we messing with? And he's like, oh, yeah, like, you better watch out. And then they just beat the crap out of him. And he actually, like, is not fending them off. And then he's like, afterward, Bast is like, what happened? He's like, I forgot who I was for a moment. It's like, it implies, so that moment could have been either perceived as, like, Kvothe has lost his powers now that he's Kote. Or it could be perceived as, like, he just needed to let them beat the crap out of him, because otherwise they're gonna be like, did that innkeeper just, like, whatever he would do, like, call fire and like destroy those people. So it kind of seems to imply that it was more the latter, that he can't show himself to still have power because he was able to summon it to attack the Skrill.
Right. And he was like, oh, wait, Kote the innkeeper would get his butt kicked by anybody. I can't, like, sell out my identity, So it's kind of interesting that he's so committed to this character. One of the things we don't really know still is why he's so committed. And what was interesting to me on the reread also was I didn't realize the timeline where it said he had only been there for a year or so. And he was described as, like, an outsider, a new guy. He wouldn't really speak up much. I didn't, like, a year's not that long. Like, he has, this is like a relatively new identity and place for him. It gets the feeling with the Waystone Inn that this is like an older place. But on the reread, I was like, a year. So something is going to happen that happened relatively recently in this Kote timeline that we have, this Kote perspective that we're seeing. And it's kind of interesting. We still don't quite know how he got here. It's still a mystery. And so it's super interesting on the reread to kind of pick up on some of these things that may help indicate, like, what's going on, why he's so committed to being a nobody, essentially.
Yeah, it's easy to think of Kote as kind of like, old man isn't exactly where I'd go, but like at least like 40-year-old, like
seasoned.
washed up Kvothe, like, and it. Rothfuss is aware that it can come off that way, because the way he writes it is like if you really thought about it, despite all the like lines on his face and blah blah blah, it's like he probably wasn't quite 30. Like, actually, probably nowhere near 30. Like, Kvothe or Coat is still young here. Like, he is still in his 20s. We don't know how deep into his 20s, but he's probably not even like 29, 28 if they're saying like that he hadn't quite gotten near 30 or whatever the exact phrase is for.
Yeah, and it
Rothfuss
said like
there.
there's
So
one line in here where Bass told a joke, and then it says Coat grinned, and for a moment his face showed how truly young he was. So it was like all of these lines behind the weary lines and the placid innkeeper's expression. He looked no older than his dark-haired companion, who indeed, he gestured toward the door with his spoon. Go do your reading, then, or bother someone's daughter. I'm sure you have better things to do than watch me eat. And then he goes, "Begone, demon!" And then he, they're just teasing each other, and they burst out in laughter and this and that. So he speaks he changes language, which was still beyond my Kingkiller lore knowledge to tell if that is something we have more context on. But it said Coat swallowed and changed languages and said something like Aurori te Dena Leon. Dena's in there.
Dena.
Oh, Dena? It's lowercase d, though, in the translation here. "Oh, come now," Bast reproached, his smile fading away. "That's just insulting." And then, so it's like, what is going on? What? You have no idea. You don't know what language it was. You don't know what he's saying. You just are picking up that these guys are like nerding out a little bit with and joking around like kids.
Yeah. And that's something much deeper is going on here between the two of them than the rest of the small town really has to offer. Like, they are witnesses to much greater going-ons in their lives if they're speaking on terms of other languages, and they're dealing with the Scrael, like all this stuff, but you don't really know too much about it at all. And something, Charles, to shift a little here, something I noticed on this read is kind of the theme around fire and kind of like flickering out of fire going on here. So we know that Kvothe's hair is considered to be like a fire red, right? Like classic fantasy protag stuff. But it's not even, and it's directly compared to fire. It's not like an orange. It is a red. And we have a couple scenes here that seem to kind of parallel this idea of like almost the cut flower thing too, right? Like the flickering out of something grand and beautiful. It's like the moment where he sits in front of the fire. You remember that, Charles?
Yeah.
And it says, "As he was undressing for bed, the fire flared. The red light traced faint lines across his body, across his back and arms. All the scars were smooth and silver, streaking him like lightning, like lines of gentle remembering. The flare of flame revealed them all briefly, old wounds and new. All the scars were smooth and silver except one," which, by the way, is another awesome moment of, like, Rothfuss has just, like, told you about, okay, he has all these wounds, they're all like this, except one's different. And it's like, okay, what is the deal with that one? But anyway.
What's different about it?
Yeah. It goes on to say, after that, all scars were smooth and silver except one. "The fire flickered and died. Sleep met him like a lover in an empty bed." Which, amazing line again. And then what's interesting too is then later when Bast is looking over Coat as he's sleeping, he like sings this little lullaby, and it's "How odd to watch a mortal kindle, then to dwindle day by day, knowing their bright souls are tinder, and the wind will have its way. Would I could my own fire lend, what does your flickering portend?" It's like
Ooh.
this whole interest, and we know now Bast is, if not an immortal being, we don't know the Fae in Kingkiller lore quite at the level to speak to this. We do know he's, like, the Fae live ridiculously long, right? And that's pretty common throughout all fantasy stories, I feel like. But we know Felurian has been around for a preposterous amount of time, and we are aware that Bast is looking down on him and being like, oh, wow, like, you're just immortal. You're living this quick life. You're a spark and then you're gone kind of thing.
Interesting.
But this does seem to be like a theme throughout these first few chapters.
Yeah.
Is this idea
It's
of, like,
come up a bunch of
fire
times.
flickering out, and Kvothe kind of probably representing that. You know, he's got the fire red hair and all that.
And it's interesting because I was going through all of my highlights of these 5 chapters to see if I highlighted anything with fire. And I did catch, there's this scene where there's a tinker outside the inn and the children all crowd around it, begging for candies. And then it goes, when it became apparent that nothing was going to be handed out, most of them lost interest. They formed a circle with a boy in the middle and started to clap, keeping the beat with a children's song that had been ages old when their grandparents had chanted it. And it goes, when the hearth fire turns to blue, what to do, run outside, run and hide. So and then that's the only quote from the song. And it says, laughing, the boys in the middle tried to break out of the circle while the other children pushed them back. And I guess it's some sort of kids game, and we all know how much lore is in kids game. But again, it's the fire turning to blue. And
That one's Chandrian. That one's
Right.
about the Chandrian, because
Yes.
it's they go on to the, like, oh, when his eyes are black and as night or whatever, what to do, that kind of thing. With that's like Chandrian, and we
Yeah.
do know those are the signs that the Chandrian that you can tell that the Chandrian are coming.
And also,
So
we know how to pronounce Chandrian because it's the rhyme. It's like, what's their plan? And then Chandrian.
Chandrian.
So you're like, oh, okay, I know how to say it now. Thanks, Rothfuss.
Yeah, Rothfuss also does give a clear pronunciation of Kvothe at some point.
He also did that YouTube video where he's like, Kvothe, coat. He like does all these pronunciations on like a Twitch stream or something. But it's interesting
I do
because we're
remember that.
comparing fire to the signs of the Chandrian, which also are related to fire. So there's definitely a connection there as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is probably something to be said for the red fire turning blue. There's all these kind of theories, almost as like Kvothe is Kvothe and I can't Cinder, right? Like that's the main Chandrian, I think. Like almost like two sides of the same coin kind of thing, and there's a lot of theorizing around that. Or if I'm remembering correctly, the name of the like people that fight the Chandrian, they're called, I think, the Amir, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, the IMRE.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Amir.
that's a different. That's the place. That's a place. Emery. No, I don't remember.
See if I can find it. But either way, that like Kvothe gets like obsessed with them and almost like would want to be a part of that if they still existed. And then later you kind of get this, I think the thing that Kvothe and Denna fight over later is when like Denna sings a version of the like Chandrian story where her like the Chandrian were like the good guys basically.
Oh, yeah,
and the
yeah,
Amir,
classic.
if that's what they're called, were like the bad guys in it, and Kvothe gets all pissed. So it's kind of plays at this idea of like, okay, is the way that Kvothe sees it, and the only story that we're really able to get, like actually as black and white, or red and blue in this case, as we might think. So there could be something there in the symbolism of like red turned to blue, and as a sign of the Chandrian. It's curious, and we know Rothfuss puts so much into every single decision. Most authors, I'd just say, sometimes it's like sometimes a blue
just
curtain is
sounds
just a
cool.
blue
Yeah.
curtain.
Yeah.
But with Rothfuss,
Rothfuss,
you gotta think twice. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the other moment that I was surprised about was I had forgotten there was like this drunken guard character who was like, "Hey, you're Kvothe," and he's like, "No, I'm just a humble innkeeper." He's like, "No, no, no. I heard you sing. I saw the place where you killed him. The cobblestones are all shattered.
Yeah.
They say no one can mend them." And it's like, okay, who is this? Like, we know the series is called the Kingkiller Chronicles,
Yeah.
right? So you can kind of read between the lines when he said where you killed him, right? Like what that could mean. But still, and then of course, Kvothe keeps him drunk and then like adds some extra stuff to his drink, maybe a little overkill, he says, and to help him forget. And then he goes to Bass and is like, here's the cover story. This. He's like so desperate to bury his tracks. But even from the first, this is chapter 3, that we're getting these kind of allusions to Kvothe's, I guess you call it, demise, endings, this tragic moment that we've been desperate to learn more about and have never gotten. And here we are in the 3rd chapter already, eager to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of forgot that line was in there where he talked about like, oh, I saw where you killed him and all that.
Yeah.
I didn't even remember we had that much detail on like how the king was killed, and sounds like then it was in a relatively public place that
Right.
had happened. It wasn't like cloak and daggers in the night kind of thing.
By the
despite
fountain, man.
Yeah, by the fountain. So it's interesting. I really wish that's like there's 2 things that I most want to know in regard to the 3rd book and the answers that we would presumably get. One is just, who is the freaking king? Who is the king? Like,
Yeah, right.
What's in the box is one of the other ones. And I guess 3 would be right, the thrice locked box. What's in the box?
Yo,
And
yeah.
I want to know.
I was going to say, we know what's in the box in 7. We don't know what's in the box
yes.
in...
Yeah, no 7 spoilers here, but
No.
let's just hope it's let's hope it's not what was in the box in 7 that's in the
Yes.
the thrice locked chest. But
Yes.
then
And let's hope
I guess
Kevin
3
Spacey's not involved.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was a different time. Kevin
time.
Spacey rightfully canceled, but the anyway, the 3rd thing actually would probably be, I want to know what happens with Denna and Kvothe. But those are the pressing 3 for me.
Mm-hmm.
And to get any information about the maybe most interesting one of like, okay, who is this king? What happened with it? Is interesting, and you kind of can easily not appreciate it when you're reading it the first time, and you're like, okay, like I'll probably get a lot more on the like whole king killing thing. It is called the Kingkiller Chronicle, and you would be mistaken because you will not get much more.
Nope. It's about as much as you're going to get. But you know what? That's okay. That's kind of the point.
Yeah, I mean, I would like the series to be finished at some point, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think there's lots of theories out.
Like the reaction that he had, he said this line where he's like, "Are you saying I look like Kvothe the Kvothe? I've always thought so myself. I have an engraving of him in my back." So what is that? Is he like having a joke right now? I don't understand. And so my assistant teases me for it. Would you tell him you just told me? You know, so it's just like, what is going on with this character?
I don't know. The engraving.
Does he have an engraving of himself on his back, or was he just lying to appease the the guard?
He said on his back.
Yes,
not in the back.
I have an engraving. Oh, in back. Shows my reading skills. I have an engraving of him in back. Back. So not on his back.
Oh, I was like, wait, I misread that.
Because I was like, I misread that. What the hell? Okay. I'm just a tired, old, humble podcaster. Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Barely literate.
And, right. And when his weary lines on his face no longer showed when he smiled, he looked barely into his mid-30s.
Now. Let's take it easy here, folks. Also, there's a took an arrow to the knee thing in here, which all Elder Scroll fans can appreciate. I totally forgot about that, but I highlighted it. I was like, he literally wrote took an arrow in the knee. And as an excuse.
When did that game come out?
When did Elder Scrolls come out? That's a good question. Elder Scrolls 5?
Is that
it was like 2010.
2010?
Is this
okay,
does this
so this predates that? Yeah.
What? This is the origin of arrow in the knee? Wow.
Or at least it can't be considered a reference.
It was 2011 was when it came out. I remember I was in college. That's why I had to do the math. I was like,
yeah. No, this was just before it was a meme. It was just him saying, "I took an arrow in the knee." Old fashioned. Yeah.
Old fashioned. Wow. Because I highlighted and everything. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you did the thing." But I guess it's less cringy when you know that that the game did not exist yet.
No, it's literally just him trying to come up with a cover story that someone could say, and it just so happened to be arrow in the knee. I don't think Rothfuss doesn't like to be cute in that way. I don't think he likes to be cute in a lot of other ways with his writing, but I don't.
He doesn't want to break the fourth wall in his story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's not gonna. That's like a Gideon the Ninth kind of joke. If that was what he was doing, Gideon the Ninth. Gideon the Ninth is all I'm gonna reference the real world internet culture and memes, even though it's a fantasy story. I don't think Rothfuss is into that.
I don't think so either. He does take a lot of storytelling stuff into play, but he's not making cheeky references and winking at you. He's very serious in his prose, so I don't think he would do that.
Serious but cheeky.
Yes, he is cheeky. He'll be the first one to not take himself seriously, but he'll also take the writing very seriously at the same time. It's a combination I've really enjoyed, where it's people willing to try really hard at something that could be considered silly or something like that. Just I'm going to write the most poetic prose I can about these two kids just yelling at each other in different languages. It's one of those fun things that Rothfuss likes to do. Yeah.
Well, we also get the appearance of the sword Folly.
He had that mount made and delivered.
Yes. Couple other references that could easily go over your head on the first read. I believe it says Chronicler is going to meet up with Scarpy. Is that correct? Scarpy. Yeah, so Scarpy is the storyteller that Kvothe, he was the, I'm looking it up now. He's described as an eccentric old man who tells stories and has a long-running bet that no one can think of a story to request he hasn't heard or knows. So I think that's when Kvothe was a kid. Curiously, Scarpy addresses Kvothe by name. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Scarpy addresses Kvothe by name, despite Kvothe never having told him it. So anyway, he's that character that, if I'm remembering correctly, it was when Kvothe was a kid who would tell all the kids stories, and he got arrested. He got arrested. Yeah, I can't find it. He got arrested at some point.
He is arrested for heresy.
Yeah.
Right.
So then later, so that was all pre-frame story. Like, that's in Quothe's retelling. But
Oh yeah, he
it
was the one
turns,
who told
yeah,
the story of the Emir.
yeah. Oh, see? Like, I got that right. So basically, you get Scarpy's telling of the Emir as like the heroes against the Chandrian, who are the villains. And then
Right.
later, you get Denna's story that she presumably learned from her patron, who may be a Chandrian, for
Yeah.
like that's part of the speculation, which paints the Emir as the villains and the Chandrian as the heroes. If I'm remembering all this correctly, it has
Right.
been
Right.
like 3 years. But it's interesting to have Scarpy, like somehow Scarpy is wrapped into this thing because he's in touch with Chronicler. So I don't know how that all fits together, but I just thought that was an interesting thing where it's like, okay, like one off, just saying, oh, Chronicler had to go meet up with Scarpy. And that's what
Oh,
he's
it's
doing
good you caught that.
before
I
he
didn't
goes
pick
to
that up.
find Kvothe.
Mhm.
So he's going to Scarpy, then Kvothe. So there's something sketchy here with Scarpy because he knew Quothe's name before Quoth told him it, and he also is like the person to meet up with right before you go to find Quoth. Like, was Scarpy the one who knew where Quoth was? Like, all this stuff is speculation, but there's something here. Like, it wasn't by accident that Rothfuss had Chronicler reference Scarpy.
No, that's a good catch. I had completely forgotten about Scarpy, but I do remember there was a moment where we got the story of the Emir when Quoth was younger. I do remember that happening and a guy getting arrested. So, yeah, that's true. Man, how many books do you think we've read in between our two readings of Kingkiller? It's got to be past 100.
Oh yeah, I
3
mean just
years?
on the podcast you're saying, or
Yeah, yeah.
just on the podcast.
Because
Yep,
what
I
that's
mean,
over, it's got to be easily over 50 books. I don't
well
know,
over 50.
but have we hit 100?
Yeah,
I don't
if
know.
we're just going books we've read together for the
Mm-hmm.
podcast and not counting the ones that are like Dylan read this book, so he's gonna talk about it, and then Charles read that book.
Right.
I don't know, probably close to 100, but not quite. I'm just trying to think how many episodes we've had. What have we had, like over
We're
250?
approaching 300. We're past 250. We're in like 280s.
Oh, really?
I think so. Let me see.
Hmm.
We are far. Yeah,
That's a
we
lot
are.
of content for you folks. And for
That's
those
a
of you who
lot
love
of
the
content.
Kingkiller Chronicle,
279. This is episode
Wow.
280.
Wow. For those of you who love the Kingkiller Chronicle, by the way, we did, after we read it, we did have a bunch of episodes that we talked about the Kingkiller Chronicle, which were full spoilers, but were more like focused on a topic. Like, I know we did one that was like, what was it called? The Good, the Bad, and the Crooked. Like,
Yeah,
and then that,
that's a
like,
good
it was a
one.
focus on the Kvothe and Denna relationship, of course, named for her crooked nose that we all know that she must have because it's Chronicler, right? Did Chronicler had seen Denna or met Denna? That's how. Oh no, it was Bast. Bast.
Yeah,
seen
Bast
Denna
had the crooked
and
nose.
said-
That was Bast.
and said that. Yeah,
Chronicler has
Well,
not
Bast-
seen Denna.
I cannot account for Bast's tastes.
Yes, that's true. Also,
None of us can.
Bast can be a little. He likes a certain kind of woman, I'll say.
Wow.
But
What do you know, Charles?
well, just from all the stories, he's always pursuing particular types of women. You know.
Like farmers' daughters.
Yeah, exactly. But to like pile on to that, because we talked a lot about the importance of the unreliable aspect narrator of Kvothe, and the fact that everything we're getting is a story Kvothe is telling to Chronicler. And even at the end of chapter 5, Bast and Kvothe are talking, and you know it's Kvothe the Bloodless, right? And he's bleeding from fighting all the Skrell. And Bast goes, "I thought you weren't supposed to bleed, Reshi." Bast said, "Bloodless and all that." And Kvothe literally says, "Don't believe everything you hear in stories, Bast. They lie to you." Which is one of those things that we have like hooked worm into our brains every time we get a opinion shared in this story of like, stories lie to us inherently, and he's later gone on to say they lie for all kinds of reasons, some being to tell a beautiful story that's just as true, so it's hard to know like everything he does exploring the art of storytelling and the lies we tell in storytelling, and one of those is that the story we're getting is probably not even the real one, and what facts are being distorted and why. So that is all just in the first 5 chapters, man. It's a lot packed into this. 40 pages, like not even.
Yeah,
we've got over a minute a page here. We could have read the whole thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great call though, Charles. That's the first, but certainly not the last time that Kvothe specifically, or characters in general, will speak to like, don't believe stories. Even specifically, don't believe stories about me. Like, and it speaks to the unreliable narrator, which is done in a very subtle way, I think, because there's still people who, if you don't like the book, that's fine. You don't have to like the book. But there's people who read the book and their main criticism is that they're like, oh, like, this character is just like amazing at everything and blah, blah, blah. And it's just a guy talking about how great he is. And it's like
the discourse.
There's a lot of discourse on that. And I get it, because Kvothe is like that kind of character. And there is the like, oh, didn't we have a discussion that was like, is Kvothe a Mary Sue? That term has kind of fallen out of use.
But it was around the time that first Star Wars movie came out.
Yeah.
It was topical.
But so those criticisms, there's some degree to which it's fair, but there's also some degree to which, like, if you're reading it closely, there's a lot of times where you start to realize, oh, they're clearly hinting that Kvothe is an unreliable narrator. And it's those lines like, oh, Kvothe saying specifically, like, don't believe stories, they lie to you. Then there's a line where Kvothe says, you have to be a bit of a liar to tell a story the right way. Too much truth confuses the facts. Too much honesty makes you sound insincere. I believe it's Kvothe that says that. If it's not, it's Kvothe telling a story of someone saying that. And there's numerous other examples, and not the least of which that Kvothe tells us, like, Denna looked like this and perfect in every way. And Bast is like, I saw her. She has a crooked nose. It's like those are crooked things. You get the sense that Kvothe is telling the story a bit of a leaned way just to make himself look like the hero that he wants to seem. And Kvothe has I wouldn't call him a narcissist, but he has some like narcissistic moments and narcissistic tendencies that pop up that you'll see throughout the story, and they seem to be playing a role in how he is presenting himself within the story. So there's a lot to chew on around the unreliable narrator bit, and showing up already, like you said, Charles, with that quote.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the actual story yet. Chronicler just came into the picture. So there's so much more to get into. Remember, we also used to do Kvothe quotes and other prose too. I just was remembering that. It's like Kvothe quotes. Wow, that is a mouthful.
That's hard to say. Yeah,
and other prose too is the. We tried our best at the time. I like it. It's fun to go back and see those episodes. It's forever ago. It was just a totally different. It's totally different show back then, but just as good. So
better even.
Some would say better. Yeah,
no,
we've really kind of fallen off.
I thought you were saying we're just as good now, but you were saying it was just as good back then.
I was saying it's just as good now, but then you were saying it's better even than now. So I was like, oh, yeah, it was better back then.
I thought you were saying
I see.
We're just as good now as we were back then. Like, we haven't gotten worse. And I was like, we're even better.
I
But
see.
I don't know.
I see.
Who's to say? Who's to say?
Who's to say? That's for the fans to decide.
Our audio's better. Our audio is better than the.
Our audio's better.
Like
our ramblings, we still ramble, but they're better now. Like better as in
topical.
More entertaining. It's not like we're.
Are they?
Yeah, you hope.
You do hope. I mean,
hope.
I know in the early episodes, a lot of times, like we did this thing where we just like in our Mistborn episodes, which I like feel embarrassed by. I'm pretty sure we just like talk at the top about like stuff that has nothing to do with Mistborn.
Oh yeah,
which a lot of podcasts do, and it's fine.
Ever, and you think you're doing stuff that like a podcast does, and so you just do stuff, and you go back and you're like, you got to just get right into it. And that was when our intro was like 2 minutes long.
Okay, but that was the longer intro was better.
Yeah, it was better. It was better.
It had
to
character,
go back to those
Charles.
days. It's like 30 seconds now, or not even. It's like 20 seconds. But back in the day, we played the whole dang song. It was like a whole thing. It was like 2 minutes long. Eventually, like people would probably want to, turning it up.
And then you turn the music down.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we stopped doing it. But that, and it was like 2 minutes long. It was like 10 minutes before we ever started talking about anything. So we gotta get through it faster. And speaking of, getting through it here, we
save our rambling for the end usually now.
We save it for the end now.
Which is better.
So much better. So much better. Because people can bail if they want to bail.
Yeah, they can make
people who've listened this far are already invested enough. It's like a sunk cost fallacy here. It's like you're in. You're stuck with us now.
It's too late for you, dear listener.
Yeah, too late. It's too late now. Our Kingkiller conversation is done, and now we're just rambling, trying to get it to the end. I mean, it says something.
We gave him an hour. We gave him a good hour or so on like 40 pages. So I hope that's enjoyable for you folks out there.
We did the prologue, A Silence of Three Parts, A Place for Demons, A Beautiful Day, Wood and Word, Halfway to Nowhere, and Notes were the chapters.
Noir, I believe.
Noir. Halfway to Noir and Notes.
Yeah.
So next is The Price of Remembering, which is a great title, I think.
Yeah. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed this new format where A, we just wanted to read the Kingkiller Chronicle again, if we're being honest. And B, we were hoping to be able to provide our listeners who we know like loved the times in which we were actually covering this book and the Kingkiller Chronicle regularly, and we're showing up and interacting with us and listening and all that kind of stuff. And then we're like, wow, all those people, if they don't read these other books,
they never heard from us again. It's like, hey, you want to hear 200 other conversations that aren't the one you're interested in? We've got the show for you. And they were like, no, bro.
Yeah, so hopefully, I said at the start, this felt like coming home for me to read this book and be back in this world. I hope it feels like coming home for any of you folks who haven't been listening to FTF for a while, if you're just like huge Kingkiller fans and don't read a lot of the other stuff that we've been chatting about. So it's really the Kingkiller folks and the First Law folks, we've been feeling bad for you because we know that was a big...
I felt really bad about the First Law folks. It's like we were just getting going, man. Just had Abercrombie on the show, and then we ran out of books. And we did. We had like our hiatus.
We did our hiatus, and then we came back and finished that series.
We did. That's true. We had to go back and do... what was that book called? The Wisdom of Crowds. Fantastic book. The whole series was excellent. Who knows? I mean, if this format works, there's potential for a whole bunch of stuff. But the point is, we're going to take our time with the series. We're going to go little pieces at a time. We're going to get deep into the content. Like we did the whole book in like an hour and a half. So now we just did an hour and 10 minutes of the first 5 chapters. So we are going to cover this book in great detail, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that throughout what's gotta be the next year. I don't know. This is freaking 92 chapters, at this pace. Who knows?
And this is the silence of one part. If there were outro music.
We wrote that.
Oh, come on, Charles.
Intro.
You're messing up my thing. I was going to do a silence, and then I was going to be like, if there were outro music. But of course, there was no outro music. I don't know.
But there will be outro music.
There will be.
Know that. Yeah, let's see. An echoing quiet, a small sullen silence, and not an easy thing to notice. And not an easy thing to notice is that we're desperately trying to get the outro music going.
Get that sweet, sweet outro music. Pump it, Charles.
Let's do it.
Like Kvothe on that lute.
Kvothe on the lute. Denna on the harp? Did she play a harp?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I knew
harp.
it. Thank you, everybody, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support the show, one of the best ways to do that is to follow us and engage with us over on the socials. FTF is back in a return to form, talking about the Kingkiller Chronicles. Let us know over on at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and then at the FTF Podcast with number 1 on the end for Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following us and engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. All you got to do is go to the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast feed, click About, and click where those stars are. You know how many of them to toss us. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, I haven't listened to your last 200 episodes, but I saw that you're talking about the Kingkiller Chronicle, and I'm back with a vengeance. 5 stars for the Friends Talking Fantasy
We don't
podcast.
have Door of the Stone 3 years later, but we have right. Name of the Wind again from the FTF podcast.
What more could you want? Rate, follow, subscribe on your platform of choice if you can, but just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening, so much more than enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.